This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under 18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 517 for May 11th, 2017. Coming up on today's show, STDs for dummies. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Minx, and we have the scary episode today. We're talking all about STIs, socially transmitted infections and diseases. Dun, dun, dun. It's actually going to be a lot of fun. But before we get to that, quick announcement. I will be giving a talk at Ignite Seattle on Thursday, May 18th. I've shifted the topic a little bit on the advice of the speaking coach to 8 things your poly friend wants you to know. Again, it's a 5-minute talk, 20 slides automatically forwarded every 15 seconds. Their theme is Enlighten Us But Make It Quick. I'll provide a link in the show notes to the Ignite homepage. They also do have a live stream of the event, and I will do my best to remember to post that on May 18th once it is live. So if you're interested in watching the live stream, then watch the Polyweekly and Cunning Minx Twitter and Facebook pages, and I will post it there. And if you're curious about the other talks that you might hear that night, I'm looking at a couple of the titles here. We've got A Card Game That Moonlights, Don't Say Thank You, How Garbage Changed My Life, How to Deliver Your Baby Yourself, John Keats on JavaScript, Poetry and Programming Problems, On Being a Saudi Seattleite, Reading the Sex of Salmon, A Genetic Scavenger Hunt. I actually heard the preview of his talk during the speaker training session. Fascinating stuff. Why most dating advice is bullshit. Yes, we're living in a simulation, but we're not just avatars. You play in the dirt while I'm on the phone. A dad's guide to Seattle playgrounds. So you can see that the topics really run the gamut. And I just noticed when I clicked through the page that they put me up first. No pressure at all. Okay. If you're in Seattle, doors open at 7, talks start at 8. And again, I'll provide the live feed. Keep an eye out on Facebook and Twitter on May 18th. And I am very excited to have in the studio with me today Jenn Stauffer, who gave an amazing presentation that I missed at RelateCon in Boise last month, but which she's going to share the highlights from with us today. Welcome to the studio, Jenn.
Thank you, Minx.
So, Jenn, what inspired you to present on this particular topic at RelateCon?
A couple of different things. One of the things is there was a person in our community, I guess it was a number of years ago, who posted a form that they used to inquire about their metamor's sexual health. And it seemed very medical and very invasive, but the people who, sort of reacted that it was not appropriate to bring that to your metamor really had no backing for that, really had no basis to say, well, you shouldn't have to give up this kind of information. This is actually really privacy invasion. The people on the other side were like, oh, anything you ask in the name of sexual health, you absolutely have to disclose. So there was this discussion going on, and nobody really had any evidence either way. Nobody had any data backing it up. So that was one of the inspiring things to try to figure out, what is reasonable to ask for people's sexual safety? What actually does cross the line in privacy invasion?
And what conclusion did you come to?
Well, I think largely in the poly community, where we talk about sexual safety a lot more than maybe in the mainstream sexual community, I think we have a tendency on the side of way privacy invasion, actually. We ask for way more than we need, physically speaking. And what I believe we're actually asking for is emotional safety, not physical safety.
I think you're probably right.
So I just did a rundown of some particular STIs and what they look like and what their threats actually are, and sort of came to the conclusion that maybe we're freaking out about something that isn't quite as dangerous as maybe we've been making it out to be.
Right. What is it that Dan Savage says? It's, yeah, freak out about herpes, but don't freak out about herpes. I think is kind of the way he put it. And I heard these amazing stories that you created a realistic pragmatic danger scale for each of like 4 to 5 most common STIs. And there was like hamsters and chihuahuas. So would you mind doing just a quick run through of the diseases that you looked at, what you rated them with, and what animal you rated each one as in terms of danger?
Sure. So I picked 4 just because they were relatively representative of the STIs that are out there. And the first one I did was chlamydia, which is very common, very easy to get rid of. You just take antibiotics and it's gone. And I did all these on an animal scale, so it's from a lamb to a T-Rex.
Spoiler alert, was there anything that was a T-Rex?
There was nothing, no STI that is a T-Rex. An Ebola. Ebola might be like some kind of dinosaur, but...
Okay, so in your presentation, just so we know, I'll give the spoiler. So what was the most dangerous animal that you compared one of these diseases to?
It was a badger.
A badger, okay. I actually don't know how fierce badgers are.
Badgers could definitely cause you some damage. It would be hard-pressed to kill you, but it would definitely hurt you.
Okay, so I apologize for interrupting. So chlamydia. Let's talk chlamydia.
Yeah, chlamydia. One of the things I looked at for all of these infections is laboratory testing. And that's actually because I have a background in laboratory testing. I worked in a medical lab for a few years. And I actually worked in the infectious disease lab, which is where we did all the STI testing. So I got to know a whole lot about STI testing. Chlamydia is really pretty easy to test for. It's very, very common testing. Your doctor will order it if you, quote unquote, ask for a whole panel. You know, different doctors will deliver different tests if you ask for that, but chlamydia is almost always on it. It's very common, very easy to get rid of. And so I rated it a hamster because a hamster can totally bite you, and you might even bleed, and you'll be fine. You'll totally be fine. As long as you're aware that you were bitten, you'll be fine.
And it's easily treatable with antibiotics, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so what was next?
Then I looked at herpes simplex virus. That one I rated a garter snake.
That's about right, actually, yeah.
Because garter snakes can also bite you, much like hamsters, and they're just about as dangerous as hamsters otherwise. But everybody seems to be afraid of garter snakes for some reason, and all snakes, I guess, because they're scary? I don't know. But the fact about herpes is that even though once you get it, you can't get rid of it, we don't have any way to treat the virus itself. We just have ways to treat the symptoms at this point. It doesn't actually do anything to you or your health, with a very few exceptions, like if you're pregnant. But otherwise, for normal, healthy adults, herpes doesn't do anything to you.
Yeah, it's mostly embarrassing, I think. You also covered things like transmission mode and the transmission rate with and without condoms. And you pointed out that herpes is HSV, is skin to skin, but it actually has to be lesion to skin. It has to be an area of breakout to someone else's skin. And that the transmission rate with condoms is 1 to 4%. And I'm assuming that it's that high because of the skin factor, that if the lesion is not on an area covered by a condom, then you can easily transmit.
Right. It isn't always lesion to skin. It can transmit skin to skin without a lesion. It's just much, much more likely if you have an open lesion.
Yeah, well, that's true because some people are asymptomatic and can still pass it on. That's a good point. Now, you also pointed out that the transmission rate without condoms is higher, 4 to 8%. So still wear condoms, even though technically you couldn't fully protect unless you're wearing like a full body condom.
Right.
I'm looking at your presentation here. It says it is also not covered in a standard panel. Shall we talk about why?
Yes, we absolutely should. In fact, there is a whole page on the CDC's website asking, why is herpes not covered in the standard panel? Why do we not test for it? And I think that page is a really great one to read. But one of the main reasons we test for STIs, and specifically we screen for them, meaning we test regularly for them over and over, is that some of them we can treat and prevent outbreaks. So like chlamydia, if you don't know you have it and you keep passing it around, that's kind of a problem if it's treatable. HSV or herpes is not treatable. The virus itself is not treatable. You can't get rid of it. So, knowing that you have it is not necessarily useful to you or anyone, any of your partners. They actually say on the CDC's website that oftentimes knowing that you have it is more problematic than the symptoms of the disease or of the infection itself.
Yeah, I assume that's true because of the stigma, and people are really afraid of this garter snake for some reason.
Yeah, and one of the other things about herpes is they estimate about 1 in 6 Americans have it.
Oh, that seems really low. That seems really low. Well, if you're talking all types of herpes.
Just general herpes.
Yeah, just general herpes, that seems really low. I've heard numbers up to 80%.
Yeah, and you know that most of the people do not know they have symptoms. And there's a lot of problems with herpes testing, including the fact that they don't order it. And even if you do order it, they might not run it. And depending on what kind of test they order, it might not come back with valid results. So most of the people who have herpes don't know they have it. So lots of us probably have it and we don't know. And we can't exactly be held responsible for propagating that information, being like, well, I don't know, I'm a human being in America, so I think I may have herpes, but I don't know. I just thought I should tell you that.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got our garter snake.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk HPV. This is another one that people get really, really scared about.
Yeah, which is interesting. The testing and the studies around HPV had a lot of question marks. There's a lot we don't know. We don't know if condoms help or not. There's been conflicting studies. We don't have a clinical FDA-approved test for men at all. So we can't track it through populations. We don't know who got it from whom or when. I know that if you go into the doctor and you ask, you believe you've had an exposure and you ask for a test, there's a good chance they won't run the test. So basically it's like it's only women who have abnormal PAPs will get an HPV test. The PAP will reflex to an HPV test, and then they can find out whether or not they have HPV. But a lot like herpes, what exactly does knowing tell you? Because it's a virus again. We don't have a treatment for the virus. All we can do is watch for the symptoms. In the case of HPV, that's really just precancerous cells. And you're going to treat precancerous cells the same way, regardless of whether or not you have HPV. So knowing about it is again, kind of this, I don't know if it's super helpful for you. It helps your doctor, know to screen for cancer cells. But if you're in a high risk group, that includes people having sexual contact with more than one partner, a higher risk group, they recommend you do pap smears every year. That's the same if you have HPV. They recommend pap smears every year. So in the poly community, if we are sexually active with more than one person, we should be having pap smears every year anyway.
And I would also add to that people like me who have a suppressed immune system that are more likely to catch something, and that when we do catch something are less likely to be able to have our body have the ability to naturally fight it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing we haven't mentioned, but I feel as we're saying, is that HPV is not one virus. It is, right, it's an umbrella term used to describe, at last count, was over 80 different viruses, most of which are harmless, one of which can cause genital warts, and a few of which are related to ovarian cancer, which, let's be honest, some of them that are related to cancer can be quite serious and can require operations that are quite painful. But as you say, that's something that you would treat it's basically, as you say, if they're precancerous cells, you would treat those anyway. It's not really relevant how the cancerous cells got to be there.
One of the things I bring up in the presentation is how many people in the audience have had plantar warts, because
yes,
also HPV.
It is. And most manifestations of HPV are harmless. Now, just so people don't write in and say, was diagnosed with HPV, I had to go through this horrible operation, it was really terrible. We do know that those instances do exist, and that is true, and we don't want to diminish that. I'm not sure that justifies the level of fear that we have around HPV for like all types of HPV. What animal did you end up comparing HPV to?
HPV, I labeled a feral cat.
A feral cat. Oh, yeah, those can mess you up. They can. Yeah.
Yeah. Feral cats, you probably don't want to mess with them if you can help it. But if you walk up to one that seems kind of friendly and you pet it, you'll probably be okay. Probably doesn't have rabies or probably won't bite you.
Yeah, okay. And the method of transmission, let's talk about that.
HPV is also skin to skin, like HSV, but it doesn't have lesions like herpes does. The low risk kind may or may not manifest as genital warts. The high risk kind does not manifest as genital warts, so you cannot see where it is, but it can shed through the skin, through the labia. We don't know whether condoms actually help prevent transmission of it.
So in terms of actions, what sounds like, we know there's no test for men. For those identifying as women, should get a pap smear anyway if we are quote unquote high risk, which means that if we have more than one partner, whether or not we use condoms, we should just do that anyway. Is that kind of a good summary?
Yes, that's exactly it. So men who have gotten the test done, because I've worked in a lab, I have this information. They have to run it with a disclaimer because no current test is FDA approved. And what the disclaimer typically means is that insurance will not cover it, and you're going to have to pay for the whole thing out of pocket.
Is it expensive? Do you know?
I actually don't know. The one that we ran was a DNA probe, which is a more recent technology, so it's going to be more expensive than a standard culture. But I don't know exactly how much the base price would be.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. Maybe I'll be able to report on that later. I guess it probably depends on where you are as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, how do you collect a sample from a man? It's going to be a urethral swab or an anal swab, or are going to be your only options.
Okay, urethral swab sounds kind of painful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have heard as much.
Okay, then. Well, maybe they're into that.
Yeah, totally. It's totally a fetish.
And the last one you covered was HIV.
Yes. So HIV is the one we all know, the one we all fear, and we grew up, kind of discovering what it was and trying to figure it out. There was a whole lot of fear around it back in the 80s. But I don't think our understanding of HIV has evolved with science's understanding of HIV. We've just kept that terror this whole time, like HIV is the end of the world. And I don't think that's exactly what science and medicine says anymore. HIV is definitely a chronic illness that you will have to manage. You will have to take medicine for the rest of your life, antivirals, and it will eventually, at the end of your life, probably evolve into autoimmune deficiency syndrome, and you will succumb to that. But what they're saying these days is if you catch it early enough, and if you start treating it early enough, you can expect your life to be just as long as anybody else's.
Which is really a big change from the 80s. Now,
right.
I would encourage people to absorb that information. I also will, just from my own personal experience, say that having an autoimmune disorder is a pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. In a country where healthcare is so expensive and where Congress is trying to pass a bill saying pre-existing conditions won't be covered. So I still wouldn't recommend it.
No, no. If you can,
I understand we're trying to reduce fear here, and so I'm on board with that. But I will say that treating any type of chronic condition, especially in the States, is painful.
oh yeah.
So, with that being said, and with the understanding that we're trying to maybe not specifically reduce fear, but bring the fear to a more realistic and pragmatic level today, it's one that's more reflective of reality. So, let's talk about how HIV is transmitted.
So HIV is transmitted fluid to membrane. So it's not skin to skin. You cannot get HIV from like hand to penis or giving hugs or kissing or anything like that. You can't contract HIV that way.
Or from a toilet seat.
No, not from a toilet seat. They've even judged oral sex to be a negligible mode of transmission. Even oral
really?
sex. Yep. Doesn't pass that way.
Now, see, to get into a little bit of nitty gritty, because of the medications I take, my gums tend to be really sensitive and there can actually be some bleeding. So is that true, even like for the recipient's gums during oral sex, if there's no condom?
If you have a compromising disorder, that's probably a different story.
Okay, so that's just me. Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, I don't know that there have been any documented cases of oral sex transmission of HIV.
And the transmission rate you report is low, 0.04 to 1.4%. And if you use condoms, they're highly effective.
That was an interesting thing because I tried to pull out the condoms versus no condoms stats, and they weren't available for HIV for some reason. I could get them on all the other STIs, but not HIV.
I wonder if that's because of our current regime.
I actually suspect it might be the difficulties of arranging an ethical clinical study around such a thing.
That would be reasonable.
Yeah.
And a little less frustrating, so let's go with that.
Who knows? But it still is this range of transmission, 0.4 to 1.4, is that what I have there?
Yes.
Is not controlled for condom use. It's across all partners and all types. So the low end of that is the penis side of penis to vagina sex.
Mm-hmm.
Upper side of that is the anus side of penis to anus sex. That percentage, that 1.4 top percentage for anal sex, I think is really surprising for people. It certainly was very surprising for me.
It seems really low to me.
Yeah, it seems really low, but I think part of that is because we are informed by our fear. One of the reasons, though, that number is so low is because the viral load during the infection can have a dramatic impact on how likely it is to transmit the virus. So in the first few months after the infection, the viral load just skyrockets. It goes huge. And this is really problematic because people don't know they have it yet. One of the things I talked about in this presentation is window periods. And window periods are the amount of time it takes between the infection and when a test can actually pick it up. So we like to go out, we say, oh no, I had this interaction and I'm really worried about it. I'm going to go get tested the next day. But the problem is that the test actually isn't going to pick it up the next day. And for HIV, depending on the test they order, you might have to wait up to 3 months.
So let's go back and do a quick review then of the window periods for each one of these. So HIV, minimum of 3 months.
Depends on the test. There is something called a PCR test available. That is a newer technology. It costs more money, but the window period is 4 weeks.
Oh, okay. So let's back up. HPV window period?
Who knows?
Who knows? That's the question mark. That's not surprising. HSV window period?
What do I have there?
Antibody detection 3 months. DNA PCR at first outbreak, maybe never.
They'll probably order the antibody test. And like I said, there's a lot of problems with herpes testing, so they may not agree to order it at all. The PCR test is usually pretty reliable, but they'll typically only run it on an open lesion. So if you're symptomatic, they can't run it.
And chlamydia?
Chlamydia is 2 weeks, I believe, no matter what kind of test they run.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. We hadn't covered that before, so I thought we could do a quick rundown. To get back to HIV, like we do, there is no cure, but there is now something that is not quite a vaccine, but is something prophylactic?
There is a prophylactic. they are prescribing this to partners of people who have HIV, who want to have, close, loving sexual relationships. And you just take a daily pill, and it helps prevent transmission of HIV. They are also working on vaccines, and there was even a study done recently, like in the past couple of weeks, they published the results that they actually cured HIV in mice. Using CRISPR, using a gene clipping mechanism.
I heard about CRISPR on Radiolab. That's very exciting.
Yeah, they, can't exactly apply to humans yet. There's a lot more research to be done, but it's super exciting. There's definitely a lot of science movement in that direction.
And to wrap up HIV, you ranked this as what animal?
As a badger.
Badger. Okay, so not harmless by any means, but not a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Not a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It will mess you up if you decide to get in its face. Don't mess with a badger, but you'll probably also be okay.
Right. Okay. You gave this presentation at RelateCon, and you're sharing it with us now. What do you want people to take away from this information?
Primarily, I want people to, first off, feel like recreational sex is okay, and STIs are not your punishment for enjoying sex.
Awesome. I kind of went, let's scream that a little bit louder.
Yeah, I was raised in Utah, and I can't tell you how many times we were told over and over and over that STIs they're this ugly, awful picture, and that's all you need to know, and don't have sex or else. That's the only information most of us have ever received around here, even as adults.
Well, I grew up in Texas, and that does not sound unfamiliar. Let's put it that way. Jenn, I really appreciate your sharing all this fabulous information with our audience. How can people get hold of you if they want to find out more, or if maybe they want to do a similar presentation to their group?
You can contact me through our Poly Group's webpage. That's at utahpoly.org. That's utahpoly.org. There's a contact form there, and I'm one of the people who responds to it. So.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us at RelateCon and also here on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
As I was editing the podcast, there's one thing that we didn't get into in my conversation with Jenn that I felt was very important to say here. When we were talking about the relevance of knowing whether or not you do in fact have some kind or other of HSV, especially if you or your partner has some type of autoimmune disorder, and you do not want to transmit it to your partner, knowing that you have HSV means that you can take the suppressive therapy, and studies have shown that people who are on the suppressive therapy are 60% less likely to pass it on to their partners. So that is one reason why we still don't want you to panic, but it would be important to know if you have HSV, especially if one or more of your partners has some type of immunosuppressive illness. And thanks again to Jenn for taking the time to meet with us and share that wonderful information with us about STIs/STDs. I feel more educated. I hope you do too. Our feedback this week is from listener Kay, who said, "My partner Bramble and I have had a lot of poly struggles over the last 6 months. I was new to poly, and he'd only been poly for a few months in a don't ask, don't tell dynamic. So of course it was a shit show, and we hurt each other. I asked him to stop seeing someone he'd been dating for 4 months because I felt threatened and couldn't own my shit, and he slept with someone at a party that we were both attending, and it was not that sort of party, and didn't tell me until several days later. After the party incident, it got rough, and we had a lot of conversations that hinted at the possibility of us breaking up. However, Bramble offered a 5-month mono grace period so that we could work on our issues without the tension of having other partners and to avoid dragging other people into our mess. As somebody possibly in a potential partner pool, your potential partners, thank you for that. And thus, I found your podcast. It has been fucking amazing to hear about the fact that yes, everyone struggles with jealousy, and experience shock is a thing. and that you and your partner can form guidelines instead of imposing rules on each other. This one was huge for me because I loathe the idea of imposing rules, but couldn't figure out how to express my needs and boundaries. So again, thank you. You've encouraged me to do a lot of work on myself and provided me with a wealth of tools to use in the process. I really think we can create the lovely poly relationship we both want. You're both beautiful humans. Cheers. Thank you so much for saying so. See, this is what we're saying. It's not that I'm a big know-it-all, but I have made the mistakes, and if I can keep somebody else from going through the horrible amount of poly pain that I went through, then I will be happy to give you all the tools in my toolbox, and you can pick whichever ones you want to use. And we have a new poly playmate this week that I want to thank personally. You know who you are, but who asked to remain anonymous. So I'll just shout out a fabulous anonymous thank you. Thank you for helping to make this show totally awesome and to get the word about this free resource out there. If you do have questions, comments, or feedback, call 802-505-POLY or email polyweekly@gmail.com. Or find us on Twitter @PolyWeekly or @CunningMinx or on Facebook at facebook.com/PolyWeekly. Thanks for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex, even the safer sex.